Vita, seconded by Kyle. All in favor? All right, motion carries. And a motion to approve the minutes of our last meeting. All right, motion by Kate, seconded by Jeffrey, and all in favor? All right, motion carries.
All right, Happy New Year, everyone. So we're going to focus most of our time tonight on the pros and cons of the individual options, and maybe there are new ideas or alternatives we want to add. But before we dig into that, we're going to start. I think this might have been your suggestion, Kate, so thank you, to start. Yeah, to get to practice. So for those of you who weren't here, we had a very rousing activity at the last meeting where we partnered up and we worked to explain Prop A and Headley to our colleague, and we found where we were getting tripped up and what was sticky, what was easy to understand, what wasn't. I feel like it was really effective in helping us all kind of understand better how the two worked. And so we're going to do that again. So we'll do groups of 2 and then one group of 3. And mixing up is a good thing because I know you all sit next to the same people in the same seats. You're very well trained that way. And it's always good to kind of talk with other folks. So mix it up. We're going to do that as the icebreaker. We'll debrief that to lift up kind of areas that are still confusing, questions that arise. Then Joe prepared some content in response to some of the information requests that have been asked to date. So we'll walk through that content. Then we'll turn to the pros and cons list and see if we can maybe take some ideas off the table and maybe narrow our list a bit. We're hoping to walk out of here with a clear sense of what information you would need to have a recommendation. So you don't need to have a recommendation tonight. It's more we need to understand what questions need to be answered in order to have a recommendation, because we are hoping by the end of this month to have a recommendation. Okay? I know that sounds ambitious, and I think especially after the last meeting we made good progress, so I think we're closer than maybe some of you may be feeling in the moment. But we shall see. All right, sound like a good plan? All right, so we'll take the first maybe 5-8 minutes, find yourself a partner or partners, and do your best to recall what is Prop A and Headley.
Through the chair, pizza did
Yes,
just arrive
and
too.
pizza arrived, so also feel free during that time to grab some dinner. Thank you.
We just sort of scrambled. So we did a really good job. That's okay. Totally fine. Do you want to go first, or you want me to go first? Sure, I can go first. I actually. Talking to some. Prop A controls.
Oh, yeah, I could
Oh, I saw it right away.
really don't know that area. I always share that.
I haven't heard from Dan Chris. Greg made the recommendation.
Like I said, they have.
I just felt like oh, it was.
Here, maybe. Help you? You're taking these two pieces.
Is that good?
I just feel like Yep.
Well, and I think that it just came.
Right on the age. But the rate of inflation, the inflation rate is up.
Yeah, if Ferndale starts growing.
I'm back in college. I mean, this much pizza.
Yeah, right?
Oh, come on. Doesn't have the like, you know, ones that had the straight.
Yeah.
This one little thing.
So what came up, conversations, questions, comments, themes?
If you turned your mic
Kate, what came up in your group?
For me, thinking about this over the last couple of weeks, and how I would, begin to sort of quickly or repeatedly explain this to people, it has become less important to me to remember the exact percentages or exact details of the differences between Headley and Prop A than it has to just sort of remember the overall impact and effect, in that one artificially depresses your property taxes and one artificially depresses the value of property in the city. And so when they work together, it just sort of continually holds back our ability to raise the revenue we need to run the city.
Yeah, that was like a real elevator speech. Good job, Kate. Kyle?
Can I ask
Oh,
you a
yeah,
question?
please. Yeah.
Speak, when you say artificially, you're saying by the 5%? Is that the artificial piece? Because
Yeah, so the artificial piece is what voters chose, both, so I guess Headley was back in the 70s, right, and Prop A was in the 90s, and we chose as voters to say, we're going to put this artificial cap on increases either to your property taxes or to the value of your city. So 5% is
or
the
rate of
number.
inflation. But there's only been one time when it's gone above 5%, and that's now, right?
The last 2 years, I think, right? This year and last year? But it's gone backwards a number of times, which also Headley didn't contemplate. So that was the interesting thing in the or late 2000s was when our property values all went down.
This is what we're trying to do here. This is exactly it.
I'm having a hard time understanding because I thought
Yes.
that this is gonna be the first year that it has gone, that we're using the 5%.
Yes.
And otherwise, it's always been the rate of inflation. Is that correct?
So speak to this. I think this is
I'm
important.
sorry, I just.
No, this is exactly why we're doing this.
Okay.
Exactly why we're doing this. Go ahead.
Yeah, if we recall from Oakland County, last year was the first time that we've hit the 5% cap.
When you say last year, you mean 2023?
And correct, last year's fiscal year, as it closed out, it was the first time that inflation supersedes is not the, went above the 5%, sorry, went above the 5% threshold. Conversely to that, as they showed, when the inflation rates were, the Fed rates were zero, so inflation rates and borrowing rates are really low between 2010 and 2020 as the decade recovered after recession. So growth was really capped to about 1% at that point. So your revenues really were really, not keeping pace.
That was the rate of inflation.
Correct. So your rate is about 1% there for a decade. Now, it was significantly disrupted post-COVID.
Okay.
So can I just say it back to make sure I'm following? So in terms of the city's revenues, have they been growing at the rate of inflation?
The city's, the taxable value is really what you got to look at. The taxable value is capped. The city's tax base is capped at growing at the rate of inflation. Now, Kate brought up the point, Proposal A and Headley worked together, and the lawmakers didn't contemplate what would happen if there was a depression, and all of the property values dropped to a new low. So when 2008 happened, it created a new floor for the citywide tax base. And once that floor was created, it took us 10 years because of the rate of inflation cap to get back to 2008 levels. And so now we're just seeing, I think we reached that in 2020. So 2020 was the first time our tax base hit the value that it was at in 2007.
Also, keep in mind that drop in 2008 wasn't, 1.5%, 3%, 5%. Property values dropped. So how do you reach that 50% for people like me who, bought my home in 2002, 2008, my property value dropped 50%. So now it's going to take several years before I get back to the tax level that I was paying. It's different for you because you bought new after the drop. So your taxable value is different. Or I'm sorry, your tax, what you're paying in taxes based on the value is much higher than mine.
Right. So your tax value went down, so in 2008, your taxes went way down. But it's not artificial because it is the way it is based on the property values.
Well, the taxable value, but my
And
equalized value has reached beyond what my state equalized value was. So when in 2008, my taxable value and my state equalized value were very similar. There wasn't a lot of difference.
right, because
My taxable value dropped by 50%, but my state equalized value dropped at the same time. Then, since 2008, my taxable value has gone far beyond what my state equalized value has gone well beyond what it was in 2008, but my taxable value hasn't come close to what it was in 2008.
which is what your millage, which is what the millage rate is applied to. The state equalized value is just to keep track for when your house eventually sells or whatever.
Yes, because when I sell the
Or
house,
drops in
it's
value.
going to be around that rate that the taxable value resets.
Right. But it's all based on the values and fortunately in Ferndale, we do have the assessor said, we do have a very healthy turnover, right? We have a lot of turnover. A lot of people move here so
You also have to watch what turnover do you have. Do you have turnover for houses like mine where I've been living in it for a long time, or do you have people who are turnover that bought in 2013 or 15? They're here for 3 or 4 years and then they're selling. So their reset value isn't as high as if I were to sell. I think you still have a lot of people that have been here for a long time. They're not selling. It's people who have only been here maybe the last 10 years that are selling. They're taking the gain.
Yeah, the,
I'm not suggesting it's not artificial, is my point. I'm just saying it's not artificial.
Yeah, voted for, but the point that.
so this conversation just correlates with the previous meeting. So in December 14th meeting, I happen to have the slides on here too. So you have your number of transfers kind of plotted out. That's from Oakland County. And as we discussed, and we can discuss it later when I'm bringing back on my information, but in my emails to the committee, when we're talking about the surge scenario, that's the instance. So no matter how many transfers you get, the impact of that transfer is really going to be just limited primarily to those properties that are on capping. Everyone else has been in their home for long duration of time really is going to be mitigated or minimized. And actually, they're going to benefit by these uncappings. So it's a strange kind of relationship, but it just goes back to the point we made in the beginning that Proposal A is just specifically placing the burden of the cost of living on new homeowners. Yeah, and so this was the illustration of the city's tax base. So you can see where it was before the recession. You can see where it dropped down to $492,000. So that's pretty substantial. And you can see the slow growth year over year until you're in the pandemic, until you actually get back to the pre-recession levels.
Do we know what the tax revenue would be if it just was growing by inflation and wasn't capped by Prop A?
I do have that figure, not in this slide deck, but I have done that calculation for council before. Kind of showing you what we otherwise would receive, but for the rollback.
So on that display, you have is it 698 million?
Million.
Million?
Million.
Yeah, it is.
Beverly Hills.
2022, and 77 million for 2003. So between 2022 and 23, the value of the city went up 100
3 years.
2020.
Over 3 years, yeah, that value went up.
I thought it was 22 to 23.
700,000 to the 800.
Over those 3 years, it went up much more than 5% each year. And that's where the county comes in, the assessors, and say, okay, we're lowering your taxable rate to match that 5% max. So when we build, this new structure over here that we're expecting to receive $400,000 based on the tax rate today, tax rate tomorrow or next year, 2 years, all of a sudden gone down, 1 mil. So now we lose that money.
Can I ask a question? You said a new build, right? You said, but a new build, correct me if I'm wrong, a new build is taken out of that is not a comparison from the prior year. So if we're building a new building today in '24, that is taken out when you're factoring in the 5% increase from '23. Is that correct?
First year, I think, but what I'm talking about is, well, let's take,
The reason I'm asking because if the city has got newer builds, it's not impacted by the Headley. Unless the city provides incentives to not have enough tax base from that new build.
It's an interesting scenario, but I want to clarify, in Ferndale, there aren't that many examples of new builds where there wasn't a previous build. We're a built-out community predominantly. You can pick examples here and there
That resets the tax base at that.
for that parcel.
Yeah, for that parcel. If
For the
they're knocking
specific
down a house
parcel.
and building that- Or. It's an uncapping event. Right.
Yeah, but the new property value would just be adjusted from the previous value. That was, the assessor, I think their term was, that's just viewed as an addition. Broadly, the term applies to a change in the property's boundary.
5% year over year wouldn't apply to that one new property.
It would get reassessed, and then you would have a brand-new assessed value and then a tax value. And that's when your SEV and your TV equalize in that year. Now you have a new base year for that one property.
So I just want to clarify the question that I was asking. Am I right in saying that if there's a new build today, the 5% increase overall for the entire city doesn't take into consideration that new build from the prior year?
The next year it would, once that,
After that building is,
it's a lagging statistic, correct. The adjustment's always going to be 1 year behind.
so if someone came in and built a $100 million headquarters here in Ferndale down the street somehow, it could go from 878 plus 5% increase from all the other properties, plus that 100 million.
Because Prop A caps you, right?
No, Prop A is the individual property.
Oh.
But this is a new build that we're talking about. Right? Prop A is the individual property.
I'm getting lost in hypotheticals.
No. It's a very simple. No, it's a good question. Everything else stays the same. There's $878 million of property value in the city of Ferndale. Tomorrow, and boom, it's built. $100 million property.
Yes.
That wouldn't take into consideration. That wouldn't be taken into consideration.
So the assessment cycle's up here.
No, yeah, go ahead.
The 100 million, it is, so your expectation of, you're thinking that we have a new bill for $100 million.
It's built today.
It's built today, so it wasn't included in the assessment for last year. And your thought is that it would go up to 977, the city's taxable value. No, it would.
It's a 5% increase on the 8.
It wouldn't, because you're skewing market rate versus what the cost of the build would be. So what the assessor's going to look at is what the actual cost of the build is going to be.
Right, they would use.
And that's going to be what the state equalized value is going to be for that building, which is not going to be set
Not
until
if
the
it's a
following
brand new
year.
building, though.
It's a brand new building. Yeah, it's the same thing.
Could we do the
Be cost per square foot. I don't
Let's
think
say
that's
there's
right.
an addition of,
Bill, what were you saying?
See that happening.
but just so we can understand the mechanics of
Okay.
what happens. Overnight, there's a $100 million.
Taxable value.
Those are two different things.
I'm familiar with what both of them are. But it's a new build, that nothing has been there before, and the assessor comes in and agrees that, yes, it costs $125 million to build, but the taxable value of this property is $100 million.
Then what happens to the revenue?
Would that not simply just increase the city's tax
It would
base
increase
value by
the taxable
$125
value
million,
for the entire city.
which
but it
will
would-
result in a rollback of the millage to make sure that that's
Because it's a
neutralized.
new build.
That's,
bill still
you're
including the
incorrect.
rollback.
That can't yeah,
It's going to automatically get rolled back once
It will-
once it's finalized and it's I
that will
guess,
trigger the rollback, yeah,
Trigger that, yeah.
the state won't allow that increase to super.
as part of the equalization process is to bring that value back down to what's in the area.
Not an individual property equalization.
I know, but one of the key points that the assessor made when he was here was that if you have a new build, it doesn't impact the 5% limitation. That 5%, the new build can, if everything else is constant and there's a new build for $100 million, my understanding from the assessor when he was here is that your property, everybody's property, the tax value could go up to go up that $100 million. And it wouldn't have a rollback because it's a new build.
I don't know if that's true.
What I can do is just send this clip up to the Oakland County Assessor after the meeting and see if they can give me some feedback on it.
The only reason I'm asking it is because the last meeting that we were at, I brought up the idea in one of our workshops that it would be fantastic if it wasn't just looking ahead and that we had some sort of target of expansion as well, in addition to, you know, trying to impose more tax on the individual taxpayers.
And in this, would,
Yeah, sure.
David, would your scenario assume that a developer spends 125 million of their own dollars, no incentives?
Yes,
Okay,
because, yeah, that's what I'm assuming.
okay.
Anything else from group 2? You're group 2.
Are we group 2?
You are group 2.
Talked about?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this will be through the chair. So one of the other questions that came up in the group was, we asked previously what the city's been doing regarding cost savings, you know, over the same time frame, right? Like we're looking at 9 years of tax assessment. So do we have any stories that we could highlight, that we could share with people that would prove that there have been cost savings that the city has taken, given, you know, with the tax revenue that we've captured, you know, over the last, I know we've been through disruption with COVID. Why did I
We-
forget? She asked about questions. It came up, right?
Yeah, you know, a lot of our cost savings are realized, as we've talked about, through mobility, technology, and service enhancements, just doing things differently, eliminating single-oriented positions. Larger stories that I could tell, and I would point to, actually no longer funding the Kula Community Center saves us $100,000 a year just in operational costs. You can add the personnel costs in there because we've also eliminated positions. I think we're net 7 position reductions since 2015, just by restructuring. But aside from that, we council established a 401H transfer from a closed employee pension fund that has introduced $600,000 of new revenues to offset costs. They have recently established a Medicare Advantage plan for all of our retirees. So we've converted all of our retirees onto one current Medicare Advantage plan that has actually reduced our retiree health cost obligations. That's significant, and the general fund does owe a portion of that as part of our mandated OPEB costs.
Joe, I want to let you continue if you have more to share, but I also
You can stop me.
wonder if a list with some numbers on it showing approximate dollar amounts would help.
For some of them, it's harder to, when you talk about workforce efficiencies and mobile workforce, they're more anecdotal. That's not something I would track on a day-to-day basis, nor did we have the means to track that at the time.
But if
But I can try to quantify some of the positions for sure.
yeah, I think that would be great. Thank you.
Through technology, yeah. Eliminating old AT&T hard. Yeah, that's a $70,000 annual contract reduction. That one I did myself. I know that one. Mm-hmm, through the enterprise, yeah. Yeah, right, so cost avoidance is a big one. Or cost deference.
I don't wanna.
No, this is the time, this is what we need to do.
So when I look at the slides from the Headley rollback calculation, minus losses, minus additions, so it's taking out what was already there. So it's only things that aren't new can't go up by this amount. So like I said, in my simple understanding, if there was a $100 million fair value, tax value property that they were putting in down the street, that would not impact, like, the tax values could go up that 100 million.
Is it for Headley or for Prop A?
I'm going to feel more comfortable just having the Oakland County answer that.
Okay.
Yes, Kate.
I just want to share that that's often how I thought about it too, the same way that David is, that there's a number we should aim for and try to like grow our way out of the problem. I often thought about it that way too. So I'm interested to hear the feedback from the county on why that's not an appropriate goal.
Because these are things that the city can do going forward to increase revenue with what we have, or what maybe provide less incentives.
Through the chair, do you think that there's value in having them come back?
I mean, I'm happy to invite them. It depends on just their availability, but their expertise, I find a lot of value in their expertise, for sure. I find a lot of value in their expertise, for sure.
You have his email address there? I think it's in that presentation. I'll take it.
Oh, it's right here.
I wonder, would it be helpful to have data on like land availability for development? Because to your point, I recall this as part of the facilities task force when we were like, where are our options for space? And options are everywhere. It seems like there's not a broad understanding either way, even if the answer is is a lot of parcels, or if there isn't, it seems like it may be. I don't know if that's easy.
I would consult with Roger, but I think the committee might think about if you want to make a recommendation on economic development policy, that could be a note in the recommendation. Because, we're talking really about incentives policy, economic development objectives, and you're talking about kind of cutting against existing policy around affordable housing, right? Because then you're getting rid of incentives. So if the goal is, if the target is growth and growth alone, then you're looking at market rate residential and market rate development. And there's no judgment, I'm just saying that's what that is. But that cuts against an existing policy. So the recommendation might just note that. Council might consider the trade-offs between these various development policies and then economic development.
It's interesting that you mentioned affordable housing, because that is one of the things that we were talking about. Discussion was, these are two items
There's a tension there.
that are intended to keep housing affordable. And so if the Headley if we have a Headley override and taxes stay the same or increase, the nation is, that does increase people's costs.
Go ahead, Kimberly, Quinn, one.
I mentioned to Quinn when we started talking about this that I practiced this on some friends over the break. They were asking how the committee was going. They don't live in Ferndale, but I practiced my elevator pitch with them, and they actually understood it, which I was like, you're a little bit farther along than I am, because there's a lot I still don't understand. But
Elevator pitch is supportive.
Yeah, so they were asking like, what is Prop A, what is Headley? Because they sort of knew what they were, they're homeowners, but like, they didn't really, kind of like a lot of us, like me. And as I was explaining it to them, they were like, well, this, like, of course you would need an override, right? Like, wouldn't you, like, I didn't really say anything to them that was like leading them to that, but they were like, well, yeah, they're like, if you want your city to keep functioning. I was like, oh, well, yeah, that's a good attitude to have. But I apologize, I've already forgotten what else we talked about, Quinn, because I'm still have holiday brain. But yeah, if there's anything you wanted to add. I think I'm good.
Words, Prop A, Headley. on that, just kind of debriefing the activity. Sorry, I'm sure there are lots of words to be shared. Okay. Yeah, Alvita, please.
Thank you. Well, through the chair. So, when I'm looking at this chart here, this one here, the Ferndale taxable value over the, I think it's 9 years, and we're seeing the dip, right? At 492, 370. At that time, when the taxable value was low, that meant that the city of Ferndale collected less taxable revenue. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then the homeowner's taxable bill was reduced?
Yes.
Okay, great. That's what I need to know.
And then it like Greg was saying earlier, it took a long time then for it to creep its way back up. Yeah.
So, unless there are more questions, which this is exactly what we're here to do. This is the most important thing we can accomplish, is making sure we're all on the same page. So, don't be shy. And if there are no more questions at this time, we'll move into some of the information requests and the homework that Joe did. Joe?
Jumping into the homework?
Yep.
No break?
Your
Okay.
homework, yes. First year, yes.
There it is. First, pardon my voice, I have New Year's countdown voice. I got a little carried away getting my kids into the 10-9-8, and it's been gone ever since. It's weird. Who knew that they had a fake countdown timer on YouTube, by the way? So I got them to bed at 10. It's awesome. Yeah. Yeah. They thought it was midnight. It was awesome.
Well, it was midnight somewhere.
Yeah. I have an amazing video if anyone wants to watch my kids break dancing. It's pretty cool. As always, we begin with the committee's objectives. We want to understand the property tax implications of all scenarios, the implications on staffing levels and government service levels, and the implications of forward progress on 2022 Facilities Task Force recommendations. Those are the three areas that we are exploring. Some homework, I bucketed this, some homework that I had that I'm delivering. I've organized, I'll begin with local income tax communities in Michigan. I did a general overview and then a deep dive with one community that I'm familiar with. So I'll begin with the general overview. There's 24 cities that are home rule cities in Michigan that have an income tax. And to lobby for to pass an income tax, you'd have to be a home rule city. So you have to have a charter, right? So not every city that's unincorporated could do this. 16 of those communities all founded their income taxes in the 60s and early 70s, so pre-Headley. 6 of those communities founded their taxes between 1978 and 1994. The majority of those being in the late 80s, early 90s. And then only 2 communities since then, Benton Harbor, and I think that the state emergency manager played a role in that decision. Most recently, East Lansing adopted theirs in 2019 through a ballot initiative. I can talk a little bit about in a moment. So the general state.
Just a general question. Are, in all of these cases, is this a voter approved income tax, or is this?
The state constitution requires voter approval. And that's kind of where we're at. So this is the general statutory guidelines. I hit just the headline. So a voter referendum is required of a majority of the electorate. If voters were to adopt it, then council would have to adopt a local ordinance. And that local ordinance is where you would identify the decision on the income tax rate. You would bracket out your brackets, and then you would identify and define your poverty exemption levels. On the rates, this is in the statute, the maximum income tax that could be imposed is 2%. Most of these communities are at 1%, and the non-resident rate is formulaically half of the resident rate. So in most of these communities, a supermajority, I think like at least 80% or 1% resident, 0.5% non-resident. So the question might be, why wouldn't we tax non-residents more than residents? And that's really just because the residents benefit from the tax, the services directly. And so that's why you would have the residents taxed more than the non-residents. It seems counterintuitive, kind of, from the resident perspective, probably. And those rates are statute. There's no flexibility there. Interestingly enough, I'm not sure of that scenario, but they did say if you were a resident in an income tax city and worked in an income tax city, you would essentially split the highest number. So if it was 1%, your local income tax would be changed to 0.5%, and then your work income tax would be 0.5%.
I think it is different in Detroit, right? Like, if you.
Detroit is
live and-
unique.
If you live and work, you pay one rate. If you just work, you pay a different one.
Well, that's, he's calling it resident, it's the same thing. If you live, you're a resident. And so you're constantly arguing about whether or not you're a resident. People own places that don't want to be considered a resident. But fine, 2%.
No, so we're talking about like living and working if you pay different rates. Higher in Detroit if you pay.
You're a resident.
If you live and work.
Live is called being a resident.
Right, we're talking though about like working there as well.
Right, so if you're a resident in a city, your entire taxable income is subject to the 3%. But if you're a non-resident in the city, only the income that you earn in that city is subject to the income tax.
So my question was, if you're a resident and work in the city, because there's a rate for working in the city, there's a rate for.
No, there's a rate for days that you work for non-resident, and then there's a rate for residents.
Yeah, and his question is, do you add?
No. Because let's just say if you're a resident in the city of Detroit, you have interest income. You're going to pay tax on that interest income whether or not.
In the interest of our time, since this does not apply to Ferndale, I'm going to recommend that we move on so that Joe can cover the remainder of his.
And I will say a new council member, Johnson, actually is an expert on the Detroit income tax as an employee of City of Detroit. So he sent me some messages. He has a lot of information on this. So Battle Creek was my deep dive, and through that I did learn that City of Detroit's income tax regulations are different than the rest of the state. So Detroit's rules are different than every other statute. There's a carve out for Detroit. It's my understanding. So Battle Creek, the way their revenue work is broken down like this. So they actually have a Headley override and they have an income tax. And they passed their income tax in 1967. Their internal tax services team is about 4.5 full-time employees. That's what it takes. The cost is about $610,000 a year. The flip side of the local income tax is generated about 33%, or now accounts for about 33% of their general fund revenue. So it's substantial. And obviously that's more than the combined millage. So now you have the Headley override millage and the general operating millage. Combined, that's 28%.
That's what we call Kellogg.
They actually said Kellogg is no longer their number one employer. I think they're 4 or 5. So then you have the state shared revenues, and again, the 25% is kind of the remainder of the charges for service. So, but for the local income tax, their revenue structure is kind of similar to ours, only we're leaning more on the property tax revenues now. Proceeds for pensions, annuities, and retirement benefits, including Social Security, are not taxed. So some of the positives and some of the challenges, as is noted before, it's more of a progressive tax, so there's more of an equitable way to tax people outside of property taxes. It is a stable revenue source, not subject to headleys. Once the voters approve it and the ordinance is adopted, that's there, and they've had it since 1967. So there's some stability there that they can lean on. And the city manager said that she believed the local income tax played a key role in helping them weather the 2008 recession differently than other communities in the area as a government. They haven't observed disruption in business recruitment or retention that's attributed to the income tax. They haven't seen any major significant industry loss because of that, to their knowledge. And revenue contributions from regional users of their downtown. So what she was talking about there is people who might choose to reside outside of Battle Creek, but use Battle Creek services directly, the parks. They don't really contribute anything, but they might leave to the neighboring township to get a lower tax rate. Well, this is a way to get some of that back, some of that use back. So there's a benefit there. The challenges is the collection problem, and that is and has been a problem since 1967, she said. The rates can vary, and there aren't a lot of mechanisms to recover anything that's not collected. So there are a substantial number of employers who just choose not to collect the income tax, and I don't know the topic enough to know that the state has a mechanism, but my impression is they don't have a consistent mechanism to help locals collect that. It sounds like they're kicking around some legislation to think about that. The pandemic workforce shift, she had expected a 50% reduction in revenues, and it's only 25%. She was actually pleasantly surprised and happy with that. And that's just a change with the nature of work. The opposing arguments about the tax's impact, and this is the conversation going on in Battle Creek today around development. You have residential developers. They have redevelopment goals at their downtown. You have developers who are resisting that, talking about the income tax as being an impediment to developing residential and then attracting new residents into the downtown. That's an opinion, to be clear. But that she just wanted to communicate that is a topic at hand, and it sounds like that's pretty consistently a topic for Battle Creek to tackle with around the nature of development. East Lansing, I did a little bit of work on that. There was a significant opposition noted in the media. At least I found quite a few articles about that. Michigan State trying to stop East Lansing from putting this on the ballot. East Lansing ultimately did. And I read a little bit of this and interviewed some colleagues, and the Board of Trustees of Michigan State and the city sounded like they clashed quite significantly. Ultimately, it resulted in a resident 1% income tax and a non-resident 5% income tax. Of course, East Lansing is uniquely positioned with a major university in their downtown, so that resulted in a substantial amount of income for them. We're not relatable at all to East Lansing's situation. So I just note 4 statistics from the U.S. Census for us if there was a thought on how to try to endeavor an estimate. This would be my best guess. I couldn't find an average household income. I found a median household income. And then I would apply that 78% labor force against our population and then do the math and perhaps come up with a number. But I honestly couldn't begin to tell you how the best way to come up with an estimate on the revenues we'd earn. So I would say I would put more work into that if that was a serious suggestion. But until then, I'm going to just limit myself to theory. Regional budgeting benchmarking. I'll begin just again, I think this exercise always illustrates for me the local government comps are just apples to oranges. You're going to see that the more you work in the weeds like I do. The variation is on how services are actually organized within the departments. So if you're just eyeballing a budget number by department in any given city, what's behind that number is going to change based on every city's position or situation. Capital budgeting, sometimes that's funded inside a government department's budget. Sometimes it's outside of the general fund. And you see that represented in the transfer in, transfer out situation. That is what Ferndale does. Service prioritization, priorities are different based on different city councils and different cities. Special services, certainly the general fund is a major aspect, but you also have to look at budget complexity of any other government. Oak Park is a population about 10,000 more than the city, but the city's overall budget, including our special revenues, is more than Oak Park's overall budget. So the city's overall budget is about $60 million. That's the budget that the workforce actually supports. That includes the parking fund, the water fund, and so on. Brownfield redevelopment. Not every community has brownfield redevelopment, so you don't have an economic development team working on that. So what I tried to do to make this more bite-sized is just break down the tables by areas, and I kind of clumped on areas. So here you have public safety, police, or fire. And what I tried to show is comparisons of populations, police departments, communities with police departments, fire departments, or just combined public safety departments. Then I tried to show the spend per capita. It's just a general way to compare, and you can kind of see as you go through this, you can kind of see what different communities prioritize based on the budget, right? So here you can see some of the variations. Clawson is substantially lower at the fire department. They have a volunteer fire department, 30 volunteer firefighters. Their only full-time salary or just their admin and command. And then, of course, we know Oak Park and Berkeley both have a combined public safety department. And please stop if there's any questions on any of these. Yeah, of the general fund, yeah, you can assume this is all just general fund. So combined, 52% of our budget is just public safety. Madison Heights, you can see, is about the same comp, and the other ones are public safety departments or volunteer firefighters. They're not really comparable to us. You look at the city manager's office, human resources and communications. There's variations on how these are structured. City manager's department might have a human resource position in it, and that's just where it's budgeted. We break ours out, but there's some variability there amongst the cities. So, but if you put it all together, you can see the dollar spend. So here Ferndale spends more on human resources and communications. That's also reflecting our policies and our objectives and the complexity of our workforce. You can see Berkeley doesn't have a human resources department, as Ferndale used to not have a human resources department. We got ours in 2015. Same with communications. So our 2015 looked more like Clawson. You have Madison Heights and Oak Park that are pretty close to us as well. I think Madison Heights and Berkeley do have more communications and human resources that's represented here, because I found that they had topics or categories called general services or city hall. I only see the numbers and the footnotes. I don't see what's behind those, so I can't tell what accounts for those numbers. But Berkeley's budget is called City Hall, and I'm guessing that represents most of the employees of City Hall, the facility costs themselves, possibly legacy pension costs for those employees. You'd have to spend more time understanding that. City clerk, legal, and information, these are pretty consistent across the board, except IT. Ferndale's a little bit more on IT. That also reflects Ferndale policy. Not all these communities have body cams, for example, and body cams is a substantial cost element. So there's some capital infrastructure that Ferndale has just opted into that other communities might not. And then economic development, this is really a function of your tax profile. So if your city has a downtown, if it has brownfields, if it has an industrial park, you're probably going to have a different picture than another city. So this kind of represents the business activity and just the economic profile of your city. And in this case, Clawson and Madison Heights are higher in per capita. That's mostly led by the finance department. Clawson had a substantially, there you go, Phil. The finance department was leading both of those cities. This would include the building department. I rolled that into it. This is just the appropriations, expenses. Yeah, our CED department offsets their costs by about 80%. They earn 80 cents on the dollar for the spend. And then DPW Parks and Recreation. Clausen goes big on Parks and Recreation. That was substantial. So their per capita spend there is $300. So that tells me that their priorities are around community development and parks and recreation. They had a substantial senior program. That varied a little bit differently. Ferndale also, is substantially, our DPW department, despite our lower facilities budget, is actually well-funded when you look at the comps. We have more services on the public works side, I think. I know we do more water infrastructure work. We do more street infrastructure work than some of our neighbors. Yes. And then the court systems, this is a different pool. Not every city has a court, but these 5 do. So you can see the per capita spending here on the different court systems too. And again, courts are all part of the general fund. They're independent. They operate independently. They make independent decisions, but their budget is still the responsibility of the general fund. They are part of the same district, but our budgets are mutually independent. So Ferndale doesn't owe for Hazel Park, and Hazel Park doesn't owe for Ferndale. No. Note on the volume to Ferndale and Royal Oak, parking enforcement does generate magistrate demand. So magistrate has to actually adjudicate all those parking tickets. And so if you don't have that, that's just taken out of your needs. Ferndale also has 8 Mile, 10 Mile, 696 in Woodward going through it, which influences the demand in Ferndale as well. And then just a summary of the general services. You can kind of see I tried to clump everything together, and you can visualize kind of where these different department spending priorities are a little bit differently by looking at it this way. On the comps, are there any questions? Is anything surprising jump out? Is there anything missing? I covered service areas, not every line item. Yeah, their fire department is likely much more robust with their industrial and commercial side. And then Berkeley and Oak Park just aren't comps with their public safety departments. That's certainly different capital. Their fire department is going to have different capital needs.
Has the city ever looked into possibility of doing something similar, or in certain areas, cities? Like clearly they're doing something different. I'm just curious, and that's in a big way, but has the city looked to say, what could we do to get this more in line?
I think we are in line with our comparable. Madison Heights is the only comp here, and we're both at 50 to 54% combined spending. Whether the community would support public safety as a policy, that's not my decision.
No, I'm saying within our, have we looked to things within our departments that we could do to?
Can you give me a specific example? What are you driving at?
I'm trying to think of, outsource some things, not outsource other things. Has it at the possibility of slightly different to be more?
I mean, look, you'd have to look. I mean, it's again, you know, it depends on assessing treasury, finance personnel, payroll. I'm not sure. You know, there, I'd say we are pretty competitive. We're the,
Okay.
if you look at if you're just looking at per capita base, we spend $88.
That's not what I thought we were talking about public safety.
Oh, and in public safety, I think we are very competitive with our actual peers. I just don't view Clawson, Berkeley, or Oak Park as actual peers.
They're doing something different drastically.
Well, they are structured as a public safety department. That's different in and of itself, which is, you know, they're also the only two public safety departments in the region that I'm aware of.
So we haven't really.
That's a policy question. I wouldn't do that unless council expressed an interest to shift to a public safety.
Well, I'm not suggesting that. I'm just.
I know.
Asking what it.
But but that's not something we would undertake unless council wanted to study it. Now, council has, in the past 15 years, asked to study consolidation with Hazel Park Fire Department. That fire study that did occur, and there was an interest by both parties to move forward. That is the only regional study, I think, that I can recall. And again, we're having general conversations now about the feasibility of combined dispatch.
Also contract with Royal Township and Pleasant Ridge. So if you got income coming in there, so of course our spend is gonna be higher because of that. So we have to take that in consideration.
Correct.
We're spending more because we're covering more communities.
Okay.
Yeah, we provide fire and EMS to Pleasant Ridge, and we provide just fire suppression to Royal Oak Township. So we serve three. The consolidation of fire facilities would be the other thing that can be looked at.
I'm just saying, I'm just trying to,
Yeah.
it's the largest spend that we have.
For sure.
Yeah, and it's just an item to, what have we done, what have we considered? Have we considered having dispatch somewhere else, like considered
So we,
this mix of service or this change of, that's all I'm asking.
yeah, no, I hear you. The change of service really with police and fire, you'd have the public safety model. You can explore dispatch, and you're looking at regionalization. And as we've talked about, I think there's interest in Ferndale, regionalism is part of our critical success factors. That's just it's a longitudinal study. That's not something that can be sorted out in the next 2 years. That's going to take a significant amount of time.
Yeah, but it's something that we've addressed and thought about is the question.
We have looked at fire, and we are actively talking to dispatch. It's not formal. The dispatch is being studied, but it's not formal. There's no formal agreement between a number of cities.
Through the chair. I can tell you that several years ago, and this was going back to when we were looking at the Headley override originally, there was conversation about, well, our EMS service is a big spend, a big part of it. And so the conversation was, well, what if we privatized it? What if we got rid of it? And when that conversation went out to the community at that time, they were like, yeah, no, we know that our EMS service is going to be there within, 90 to 180 seconds. A private service, you're waiting for them to come into a community. You could be waiting 10, 15 minutes. People at that time didn't want to have to deal with that. They like their local EMS service. They know that they can count on it. And in fact, in the survey that we just did, they rated our fire department as like the highest. That's a question that we could have,
So, yeah,
Because most of these people, there are communities that do different things to save. We're essentially talking about dollars here, right? And so have the number. Know what the Headley would bring in, what a override or a continued the way it is would bring in. So we do know what we could save, and we do know what additional revenue, like we could have targets, as opposed to going and saying,
I'm going to recommend we continue move on. I think that this is good conversation, but I just don't want us to get too far into the weeds that we don't get to some of the other important things on our agenda tonight.
All right, well, the last one that I really did a deep dive on was the tax-based profile. You've seen a lot of the feedback that I've shared from the county and me. We've been crunching numbers together. What I did really focus here on is the quartiles. And so that, if you got my email last week, I shared information about our average and our median taxable value. What I wanted to do was segment that out, and there was an interest from the committee to understand the number of parcels in each quartile. So you can see the majority of our parcels have a taxable value between 0 to 75,000. Significant majority, and then a significant submajority is the next tier of the quartile. So we don't have very many properties that are 200,000 plus. We have some, but not very many in the range of the population mix. So visually, that's what that quartile looks like.
Just quickly, was that single-family residential, or does this include apartments, multifamily?
This is single-family residential. Or condos. I will get a clarified list that he pulled, but it's my understanding this isn't, Ferndale House isn't included on this. That's treated as a business, I believe. So we just keep this in from Oakland County. This is just the illustration of Proposal A. So what I did here was show you the quartile property. So a typical property in quartile 1, as we've looked at, would be, in this instance, this person's been in their home for 24 years. On the taxable value, you can see the difference between the taxable value and the SCV. So that's the benefit of long-term home ownership. You get a tax benefit for that. And this would be the scenario of all the millage options that we've explored. So the partial and facilities is $84. The full is $127 at the high end. And at the no end, it's a reduction of $139 a year. Quartile 2, our next biggest quartile, someone who's been in their home for 8 years. You can see there's still a substantial difference between the taxable value and the assessed value, but it's less dramatic than the first scenario. And in this case, it's a $500 reduction if there's no millage renewal at the low end, and at the high end, it's if it's a full restoration up to 20 mills, it's $467. And then the partial renewal, which is just keeping what your tax is now, and then adding a facility millage would be $307. Quartile 2B is really focused on the rental. In this case, this example property is a non-homestead rental. The SEV and taxable value are pretty close, so this must have been purchased and then updated recently. And in this case, as Quinn pointed out, this table doesn't have the dollar values. It looks similar to the previous property, but I will provide that as a post note after the meeting. I wonder if I hover over it, if it'll show. Oh, all right. Quartile 3. We have about 800 properties, I believe. There's a substantial, this person's been in the home for 5 years. There's a less substantial difference. Again, on the low end, non-renewal, it'd save the person about $539 a year. And on the high end, it's a $494 per year increase if the millage is fully restored. On the fourth quartile, we have about 120 properties that are valued over $200,000 in taxable value. So that's a $400,000 to $1 million situation. In this case, the current taxes would be $15,184 if that was just equalized recently. This actually is not an actual property. This is just a scenario that assumes this property was recently equalized and the assessed value equals the taxable value. So a reduction for someone in this bracket would be significant. That's a reduction of $1,300. And an increase equally substantial would be $2,500. So there's a really good example of the disparity that's caused by the Proposal A around the tax burden. So recap, Proposal A, it controls the growth at the individual property level. Then the Headley Amendment considers all of that aggregated together, and it results in a millage rollback typically if the tax base, collective tax base value exceeds 5%, or the rate of inflation. That is the homework that I'm reporting out on.
Joe, would you remind me, in one of your bar charts, what facilities is? Is that that's a bond and?
In this
for
case,
amount?
yes, that would assume a bond issue, and we just assumed the Facilities Task Force report controls there, and it's limited to the Public Safety Headquarters and the Martin Road Rec facility.
Would it be helpful to have a quick break? Yes, 5 minutes.
There's a lot of.
Brittany, how are you picturing this happening?
Two things. So first, I want us to get the right list to start from.
Yes.
So the question initially will be, are there any not on this list that need to be added? Are there any that are on the list that somebody would like to? So we will refine the list to start with. And probably just work through each. And we will not hurry. It does not matter that we finish the items on the agenda. As a group, feel heard and comfortable.
Gonna have like a separate sheet for each one?
Oh, I
or-
was gonna do a separate sheet.
Okay.
Code the pros and cons.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
Cool. I might recommend that we don't take off to start. And that way, for the record, we actually have, like, we looked at
For
this,
the
we thought
report.
about, yeah. We thought about the pros and cons in this, and that's why this
Yeah.
one had too many cons, and that's
Good
why we.
suggestion. Let's talk about it. So, Quinn had some good process questions. How are we going to go about this? So first, we're going to start with making sure we have the right list of options to start from. I just wrote down this list because it was the chart that he had, that he used over and over again, not because I'm saying these are the right things to have on the list. What we want to be doing is talking about pros and cons of the options that you all think are really options. Quinn's point, which I think is really smart, is for the record and for the ultimate recommendation, it might be good to talk about some options, even if we all decide we're not doing a facilities bond. None of us really like that option. It might still be good to talk about the pros and cons of that so that we can document how we all feel about it. So I think that's really smart. And I recognize that this may not be a comprehensive list. So I guess the first question is, are there other options that you would like to talk about today?
So, perhaps I can ask, Councilmember Polika, is council is looking to see from us a recommendation for what to do on Headley and what sort of ballot initiative, if any, that we would like to recommend. So I'm not saying that we don't have a recommendation on income taxes, totally fine. I'm not entirely sure where I was going with that, but I just want to make sure that we understand what council is looking for from us.
So we know that we're looking at $4 million. And we're looking for this group to make a recommendation to council how to handle that
Okay.
over the next several years so that we can provide the services that everyone expects and still balance the budget.
Okay, so if our recommendation comes back with, please do income tax, that would satisfy what council is looking for from this.
That is the recommendation based on all the information that you have and your conversations with other people within the community that you believe that that would be.
Okay, thank you. And then I would just also point out that these are then not mutually exclusive. Like, there's no reason why we couldn't do a partial renewal and income tax recommendation. So, okay, just so we're all on the same page.
Other item that I don't see up here is a dedicated millage. So similar to what Oak Park just did with a dedicated millage for recreation operations that went along with their recreation bond to build their new facilities. So I don't see, a police and fire millage, recreation millage, something like that. Special purpose millage. Thank you.
I think it would be helpful as we think about pros and cons to have the specific special purpose millage you'd like the group to discuss. Is there one you would like to propose?
The one I'm interested in is recreation. I think my question, just doing some quick math using the spreadsheet that Quinn and Joe had shared, is what is our what's our capacity, right? So millage capacity, bonding capacity, understanding whether or not, how much you could raise through a special purpose millage might help answer a question of what type you want. But personally, the thing we consistently underfund, at least in the last 20 years I've been involved, is Parks and Rec. So
Adding a Parks and Rec special purpose millage.
And I would also add a facilities special purpose millage to that as well. That was something that came up during the facilities task force.
Yes. And if I could spell today, it would be helpful. All right.
I don't think it would be possible at all. I don't think, but the recurring thing that we keep saying is, if you look at the chart, we say 900 of our parcels are between 0 and 75,000. Is it possible to do a catch-up? Could there be a catch-up? Like, if the community's willing to just curious, is there any way to, I don't know.
Do we have the answer to that, or do you need to get the answer?
Can you define what you mean by catch up?
So we've said a couple times tonight that a lot of people's property tax value hasn't caught up.
you mean, could I elect to have my?
That's right. Yeah. Or could the city do something to do that? I think the answer is no, but
Do you have
Not
the
to my
answer?
knowledge.
Voters can't vote to change their property value.
well, we have a state tax, we have a state law. I believe the Headley is a state law that.
Correct.
Right? And we as a local community are saying there's a potential to override that to allow an increase for everybody, but is there a potential to override it at the lower end? The answer is no, but.
I'm sure that goes on because it automatically turns off and then turn back on.
But the state tax commission, they'll set a rule that would go in place. Something that the local state tax commission mandates.
I was just curious if that was an option.
Good idea, but
Well, I don't think so. I don't think so, because I think that'd push people out.
Any other options you would like on the table for consideration?
I do have another option I would like to add, and this is a recommendation for the city to have a transparent and formal review of city spending, specifically to look for efficiencies, to decrease costs as they go. Yeah, so I mean, it would come from council, and then the city would basically just look at, what are we spending money on, and is there ways to have increased efficiencies to decrease spending?
got something called facilities.
Yeah, so
So number 7 should be me. Because what we're calling facilities.
right, I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be only maintenance. It could be,
Okay.
it could be capital
trying to remember what you
for
were telling me about
non, it could be capital for other projects that are not under a bond.
Okay.
Because
so
the
we talked
bond
about
is,
it, we
yeah.
got to it. Okay.
Can I ask you a question about your suggestion? Because I really like that a lot.
Mhm.
And I guess a question to everybody, could the recommendation be to city council after performing some transparent study on efficiency of our current finances? If they're not successful in doing that, then could that be a recommendation to council? Could a recommendation work that way? The finance committee suggests this transparent efficiency study, and if that doesn't result in sufficient savings, then
So,
go for
yeah,
some sort of.
so, Joe, if there is going to be a ballot initiative, you have to know by April, is that correct?
If you were to look at August or November's election, we should know by April.
Okay, so what that means is there's probably not enough time to prioritize a spending review and get it on the ballot.
But that could be that could be our recommendation. Before, that could be our recommendation could include a lot of this stuff, right?
Good, Chair. So in March, we actually we start our financial entire day in council chambers. We review all the potential changes to the budget. During that time, staff makes recommendations on where we can make but also where we want to increase spending to increase efficiency or to invest. And so, we kind of take pride in the fact that we do review the budget every year to make sure that we are spending right. Now, I think what you're trying to say is you'd like council to look at places that we could reduce large chunks of spending. So, is there a place that we could reduce, 1.5 million out of the budget? That would require significant how the city operates, which is possible, but is that what the community wants? And I think that really needs to be part of the proposal that the committee makes to council is, maybe it's a combination of, we recommend a millage of, 2.5 mils and a bond of, 20 million in a bond. And we want council to cut 1.5 million out of the budget, and we suggest maybe these areas are where we can cut. That would have to be part of the recommendation so that council can look and see what
Yes, that it could be part of our.
yes, it can be.
I also thought you were asking a sequencing question in terms of what would happen in terms of sequencing if this were to be sequenced before. Were you getting at the sequencing question as well? Say, this must be done first before, say, a partial.
I guess asking if that could be part of our.
Yeah.
recommendation.
Can you answer the sequencing question? Is it possible, given whenever the funding issues will occur, to do this
We're
first?
just making a recommendation.
Right.
I don't think there's enough time, because right now, staff is working on the budget. They would have to invest in time. Staff, would have to take time to do the study in addition to working on the budget, for council to review in March. Because it has to be approved by the end of April, and usually council will make the adjustments after we have our meeting with council in March, and then the first council
Public hearing?
Public hearing, thank you. Where the study has, you know, the citizens have input on, you know, the budget, and then we vote on it.
Sure, but if that was our recommendation to council, and council said, hey, we're not able to get that done in time for this August, next one would be available, like, next vote that could possibly be in November. The following November, so will it be?
This November, what you're looking at.
Through the chair, I think, you know, if,
I'm just asking when the next.
yeah.
If there was a timing problem, but this is just our recommendation, the city council could come back, not the finance committee's recommendation. This is what we're gonna do instead.
Well, you can kind of walk and chew bubble gum at the same time. So, I mean, you can play with variations. So you could, one, if you want to do a transparent study of efficiencies, you wouldn't have the staff that's been doing this work do that. You would hire an outside firm like a Plant Moran who actually does specifically auditing and has a government specialty, which they do. So council would have to make a decision whether to do that. If they did that, what that firm would then do is observe operations, study operations, and then make determination based on a target. So if the target is to cut $4 million out of the budget, they would go in there, look at that, and give you recommendations on how to cut $4 million out of the budget. But to that kind of analysis, if you're looking to make that kind of meaningful change, that would be a third party. And I think when I say walk and chew bubblegum at the same time, the 2015 renewal was 10 years. So the recommendation might be to cut that 10 and not do 10, do a limited example, 3 to 5 years. And then you can do a combination of studies. So you still have, you're not turning the Titanic overnight. You are giving the community time to actually have an opinion via the ballot, but then also council have an opinion on the services in response to that and other indicators, and then take the time to actually audit with the third party. So that's just my comment on that.
Because the third party isn't going to take into consideration. They're going to look at the budget and say, well, you can cut here, you can cut there. But, you know, but then they may say, well, no, we don't want to lose that. Going head first into having a third party analysis, I'd rather hear from the community.
How we got there, though, I was just asking if this could be part of the recommendation. The answer is, we can hash it out, and it could be, but.
No? Quinn?
Now,
24, 25, yeah.
expires.
No, the current millage expires December 25. So
You're creating right now
is the final year of that. So,
is the final year.
yeah, we do
This
it.
isn't going to.
Correct.
X values starting. Millage rate.
Yeah.
Millage rate.
This is the final year that we will budget, assuming our numbers as they are today. If you look at, if we're in the situation a year from now, we will be assuming $4 million less. So this is just strategic planning, anticipating what we know to be true. So we're just ahead of it. Council's ahead of it.
If we were to. Offset and says, okay, yes. Veteran 20.
Yeah, the missing context there is, I'll just be frankly honest, you have an organization that knows it's going to cut $4 million and a workforce that knows it's going to cut $4 million. And I have all major union contracts that expire next year. Those contracts expire next year aligned with the Headley millage intent. So those labor negotiations are going to be factors. I would anticipate that will have a factor in retention. But with that too, like I had kind of thought. The sequencing and timing is under your purview. That's under your purview.
Have a sense from other communities what the experience has been in terms of staffing and these kinds of questions?
Yeah, I mean, very much as we've talked about, recruitment and retention in the civil workforce is the top thing on my mind and the top thing on every government's mind right now. I've not been equal on fire department staffing levels since 2017. That's 7 years. We actually had a standing vacancy of 7+ firefighters until Chief Robinson, in the last year, she's been able to successfully get that down. We have two vacancies right now. That growth has happened in 1 year, directly after we actually substantially increased their collective bargaining contract to be more competitive in the region. So that fire contract is based on our millage rate today. That fire contract will not be supported if the millage is not renewed. And that ultimately, because it's supply and demand, it's frankly just supply and demand. There's not a lot of talent pipeline in public safety, but also we're seeing that in civil service. You're seeing that in the trades. You're seeing that in the building side of things. Yeah. So frankly, you know, as we've talked about, you have townships which just have a different taxing structure and they have a competitive advantage over cities that have just more legacy costs in different situations than us. So honestly, we already are seeing retention and recruitment problems. We have been experiencing that since 2021. And so that just will get more difficult.
Okay. All right, other recommendation options you would like to add for discussion?
I do have one additional recommendation option. It would be in addition to what, I mean, none of these are necessarily, some of these are mutually exclusive, but a lot of them are not. So this one would be on top of whatever it is that we decide. And so my recommendation would be that council consider a property tax disclosure ordinance. This would be something that I've definitely heard the community talk about. It would exceed the state's minimum requirement of the property tax notice on the seller disclosure form to prospective home buyers. The notice currently reads, buyers should not assume that buyers' future tax bills on the property will be the same as the seller's present tax bills. Under Michigan law, real property tax obligations can change significantly when property is transferred, which, as we all know, does not mean a whole lot to somebody who's buying a house. So my recommendation is that we recommend requiring a one-sheet explanation be provided to home buyers at the same time that they receive that seller disclosure. The document should provide clear, plain language on how to calculate their expected taxable value, how to look up current millage rates for the property, and how to estimate their summer and winter taxes after the sale is complete. So therefore, after reading the document, homebuyers should know, number one, that property tax uncapping is statewide, not just in Ferndale, and how to estimate their future property tax liability. Now, obviously, there are a whole bunch of questions around this, like how would we do this? You know, can the city do this? I don't have all the answers to that. I don't think we need to go into that necessarily deeply right now. I just want that sort of out there in the world, that I think that that's something that we should ask council to investigate in the interest of keeping residents, potential future residents, informed.
Let me say it back to you because I'm not going to get it right.
Yeah.
Is the verb investigate doing this, or is the recommendation you're proposing to do this?
Given that I do not know that it is necessarily allowed under state law or all of those sorts of things, I think that it is, because we can exceed what is required by state law. But I think the verb that I used was consider when I wrote it.
Okay.
So consider a property tax disclosure ordinance.
You're saying outside of villages or whatever?
Yeah.
Ask the city council to
Mhm.
find the website where they.
Yeah, it would be an informative piece to prospective homebuyers.
Yes, Kate.
One other thing I just think we should, if we're going to talk about all these things, I think that one other thing we should talk about is public safety special purpose millage. Just because it is the largest expenditure, I supported a small expenditure that we often neglect. This is the largest expenditure in our general fund, so we should at least talk about it.
I would specifically go towards this.
And I think it's important to note that the recommendations from the facilities task force was more than just those two facilities. So it wouldn't be the facilities task force recommendations in their entirety. Right. Yeah. But, yep. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yes. Yep. Yep.
If we,
That doesn't fall under our 20.
Other options you'd like to see? That's plenty? Is that what you're thinking? All right. All right, we're gonna, I think it.
No, I do. It's
Oh, please, now is the time. Now is the time, my
I even
friend.
want to put it on the list.
Well, let's talk about it. We don't have to write it right away. Let's talk about it.
Okay, yeah, I don't, and I realized I left my folder with my past presentations at home. But when we talk about recruitment and retention, and we talk about the changes that we've now, or the turnover, I guess, that we've now become used to in the public sector that a generation ago didn't exist, a lot of that had to do with pensions. And there is a provision to sort of essentially reopen a public safety pension fund. And now I don't remember what it's called. Joe's going to remember what it's called. PA 345. Thank you. I mean, you want to talk about yeah. It's to whichever community enacts it. Yeah. Public safety in Ferndale. So, if you want to talk about a humongous recruitment and retention tool, and there's a lot of current research around whether or not 401k contributions actually save employers money, right? So it's a very topical, and perhaps this is something we ask be explored as opposed to approved, but that opportunity would really set us apart from the other cities in our area in terms of how competitive we could be in hiring. And it might possibly be a nuclear bomb on a ballot So it may be hugely unpopular. I really have no gut feeling for how this would go.
This is what every police officer talks about when they meet up with
Absolutely.
their friends from other cities. Oh, what age are you? What's your multiplier? What's your, sit and talk about it.
So if we want to compete with like Chesterfield Township or Independence Township, right, who don't have statutory caps on their millage rates, who have newer facilities, who can pay more, who have, often less dangerous buildings that you need to go into. This is a tool, but it's
Very expensive.
new. Well, I don't know. That's the thing. I don't know the answer to that, David.
He said yes.
I would be interested to see the backup of it. That's why I don't want to put on the list. It's very interesting, but I don't know much about it. Or if anyone's done.
So what if we do this as we split the difference? Joe, go ahead, Joe. You have thoughts.
I was going to say, I don't think I need to share them because you wanted to do pro and con, right? So I think that'd be the time to have the detailed discussion about that. I'm not saying it's cost prohibitive. I'm saying it's very complicated. And it's a variable. So once it's passed. And that millage rate won't be as predictable as like a tax rate because it's going to be based on your legacy agreement and it's going to be based on any new agreement you have. So you're going to have two pension systems going.
And your projected benefit obligation. Right? What you're gonna have to pay.
Well, you'll have a legacy system and you'll have a new system.
Right.
Do you,
I asked the group if it's.
is it,
It would take, I imagine.
is it a road we want to travel as a group?
I agree with that. I don't have enough information, and I think that we're far along in the process where I don't know that we would, but I love options, and I think it was good that you brought it up.
Anybody want to argue in favor of?
Great to know what it would cost. But if there was a actuary who calculated what that would be for the,
Yeah.
great, but because then that could be something just like.
Yes.
Could go in this study efficiency area. So what Joe's just talked about in terms of, needing to hire an outside firm to study, major changes in organizational structure, I imagine we're gonna have to pay money to find out how this, could be implemented and what it would cost in Ferndale. So perhaps if there's interest, again, and I swear I'm not advocating, I'm just raising it because it's new, it's different. And I don't know of anyone nearby who's done it, but it would be beyond, I think, our capacity as an organization to quickly get information together on it.
Through the chair, I have the mechanics of it. So I did all the legwork and I can come back with the mechanics of what needs to be done, which is why it's complicated. No, because the dollar amount's really going to depend on potential market conditions, your multiplier, what you can negotiate. That's really going to be depending on the bargaining agreement, what the city and the city's ability to pay. And then the workforce levels. So you could get ballpark, but nothing better than ballpark without serious study.
So we'll take that as an action item. We'll leave it off the list for now, and then we can start with that. So this is what I would suggest we do. I know some of you have already done your homework. If you would be willing to share your homework with me via email, I think it's better than sharing it with one another because I worry that somebody's going to see something. I worry you're going to confuse one another. So if you could share it with me and Joe before, I could prepare poster papers with the pro and con lists. and then we could talk through each one at a time. Y'all could clarify what you mean, ask questions of one another. And that way we're not generating the lists in the meeting, but also we're not confusing one another by saying something, writing something in a certain way, and it verbally would have landed differently had we had a context of the conversation. Yes, Greg. Yes. Yes, and we can, I think we have a sheet. Did I make a pro and con sheet? I think I made a sheet that we can send to you. Yes, well, to you, sorry. I think we made a sheet that we can send to you to complete the homework that has the options. We'll have to add the ones that are added. I think it has the basics of, does this apply to the 20 mil limit? Does the Headley rollback apply? It includes some of those data points just to help you remember. Not saying if they're pros or cons, and then a column for pros and a column for cons.
Once you have collected everybody's feedback, can that list of pros and cons be sent out for our review prior to the meeting?
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that.
The comprehensive list. That way we can.
It will be contingent on you all getting your homework done quickly, because our meeting is in 1 week. Yes. So as soon as I get the last persons, I will do that. That's right. So if it's noon on the day of, no.
Well, you
Yes.
say this is a deadline, and if
Yes.
somebody doesn't get
That's
theirs
right.
in, then you're gonna have, because somebody is
Yes.
inevitably not.
That's right. That's right. Yes, good point. What would you like to say?
When would you like to have that all to you?
Go ahead.
I try to communicate to you guys by Tuesday at the latest, so I would say this weekend would be helpful, and Monday would be the
By
deadline.
Monday at 9 a.m.?
Yeah.
Monday at 9 a.m.
Monday at 9 a.m. it is.
Okay.
And we can share out details, but an open meeting act reminder, we can't comment on those, we can't reply on those. So just hold your comments and questions for the meeting, or just dial us individually.
Yep. Okay. And we'll send a document that you can use. Okay, good. Anything else? It's okay. I promise you, we will get there. We'll take our time, because we're going to get there together. And that takes more time. All right? We still got all of January, so basically. Yes, please, Kate. Yes, please. Kate, you are always so good about this. I love this about you. Yeah. Oh, yes, paranoia. I feel that.
This is my paranoia, and because I just RSVP'd to something on Thursday, January 25th. I just want to super triple check. We are not meeting on Thursday, January 25th, right?
I booked us when we started through January 18th. So that is our supposed deadline.
Yes, good. Okay? Good.
Sounds like it's a good deadline.
Kate will be at a party. All right. It's good to have a deadline. Lights of fire. All right, good, everyone?
All right, are we closing?
Yes.
All right.
Public comment?
We did it, guys. Yep. So seeing no one here in the audience from the public, we will close public comment. And can I get a motion to adjourn? I saw Alvita first, and then seconded by Dave. All in favor? All right, motion carries. Have a good evening, everyone.